So I've created this tutorial to help us gain a better understanding of the modelling tools which are used, and firstly we're going to focus on the difference between a context diagram and that of a data flow diagram. So we're going to use the example of eBay, and basically the context diagram looks at the overarching context of the system. Now for eBay, the context is that sellers will post an item at its start price and buyers themselves will bid for that item, and once they receive the highest bid they then get a receipt in order to initiate payment of that item. So the overarching process is selling the item. So the context as shown in this diagram here is basically we have the external entity, which is the seller, and some variables they will flow into the major process of selling the items, and these variables are the item and the start price. So they're variables because items can change and so can starting prices. Now on the other side of this context diagram we have the buyer, who they will continually add bids constantly into this system until the highest bid is recorded. Now this is all determined within this sell item process. Once the highest bid is recorded, then a receipt is sent back to the buyer and payment initiated. Now obviously we can get a lot more specific with this. The modules of selling items can be broken up into elements such as determining highest bid, processing receipts, processing payments, but a context diagram itself looks at that general overarching theme of the system. And this itself here for the eBay application, it's a very good example for that. So a data flow diagram is what flows after a context diagram has been developed. And basically what a data flow diagram attempts to do is get a lot more specific than the context diagram. And it also includes another element which is not included within the context diagram, and that's the storage element. So if we have a look here, if I change screens here, here's an example of a data flow diagram for our what I did there, sorry, for our eBay system. And basically we have the seller and the buyer who are similar external entities in the context diagram, and basically we get a lot more specific. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 processes within this. Now please bear in mind that's not the symbol for a data store, however they weren't available on this Glyphy site. So basically the seller themselves, they have the item, the date, the reserve price. This all comes into this process of processing the item, so it would be stored within the database so that it could be accessed. Then from the other side then we have this buyer who, for the same item, they will select a bid. That bid will be processed and it will be continually going through this area here to determine the highest bid. Now once the highest bid has been recorded, the sale will be processed. This will also be stored with the receipt number generated. So we have receipt number, we have item, and we have highest bid. That's stored back in this database, and it's also sent back to the buyer to initiate payment. So the receipt number and payment is then sent to this process payment process, and then that is actually sent back to the seller over here. So each of the flow lines go between the processes and the storage, which is this database here. And basically one of the things that you can see is you can see this flow of data. So especially here with the buyer, you can see how the item and the bid flow into this one, then they flow into that one, then this one determines the highest bid. So that's how we get this highest bid variable come from there. So it's been looking at the bids and it will determine the highest bid. So the computer itself will determine that. Goes in this process sale. Now in the sale process, this is where a receipt number is generated. So there is a reason why that has appeared there, and all along you can see item especially going through all the processes, and it's consistent coming back to the buyer itself. They all have consistent naming and appropriate naming, and there's no main errors there within it. Now obviously there are a range of different solutions for this. We can get a lot more specific. but in general this itself is quite a sophisticated data flow diagram, and I've used all the process except for this data store. We all know that's a different symbol that's used, but it's a lot more specific than the context diagram, and the purpose of a data flow diagram is to show the flow of data, with which this does adequately.